Hello, everybody. It's Dave Neal, stand-up comic and host of Bachelor Nation News. We have an update in the Clayton Echard paternity scandal, rocking the world. That's right. The lady who has accused Clayton of being the father of her never-born twins has a new motion. In part, I believe they want this case dismissed. They know it's not going to get dismissed, and then they're going to appeal the decision if it doesn't go in their favor. That, I believe, is what's going on. Not a lawyer. Look into it yourself. This is my commentary. We're starting to understand the blueprints of what's going on with Jane Doe's legal strategy, and it's made extremely evident, in my opinion, based on the motion I'm about to read to you, that they just want to smear Clayton. They want to punish him. They want to make it so that he just has a bad day and decides to dismiss this whole thing. That's really my thought. I mean, she tried to tell him she was going to sue him for $1.4 million. She's compared him to Harvey Weinstein and all these crazy, crazy things. I'm going to try my best to read this motion, but there's a lot of words that I'm going to have to switch out because this video will just get demonetized. I mean, there's some heavy, heavy things in there. Heavy hypotheticals. Not exactly accusations of Clayton's character, but hypotheticals that associate him with some of the worst things you could be associated with. I'm starting to see the blueprints of what it appears Jane Doe's strategy might be, which is to continue to punish these men, in my opinion. These men being Clayton, Mike, Greg, Matt, and also myself by some of the torment I've had to deal with regards to the emails and bizarre social media posts by her attorney. As I've mentioned before, in the game of hockey, there are people that shoot and score goals. There are people that defend the goal. And then there are also players that are just hired to cause problems, to be thugs, to rough other people up. That's their job on the rink, is to hurt others. It's kind of my opinion that that's sort of what's going on here. Now, don't get me wrong. I believe Jane Doe's attorney is going to try to win this case, but I also think he's going to try to take as much collateral damage as legally possible in that process. I think that's what he's being paid to do. That's my opinion, and I'm sticking with it for now. All right, here it is. Reply in support of petitioner's motion in lemonade. All right, here it is. There is one main issue in the case. Again, this is through the eyes of Jane Doe. Of course, through the eyes of Clayton, there's many other issues, which he claims is fraud and so much else. I'm going to show you guys in the minutes I spent looking at this before I went live with you. I'm going to show you ways that I refute some of the claims that are made in here. I can do this easily. I can do this super easily. I did it before my morning coffee even hit. We'll get into that in a second. There's one main issue in this case. Did petitioner Jane Doe become pregnant as a result of intimacy with respondent Clayton Echard in May 2023? That is a yes or no question. And it has nothing whatsoever to do with Miss Jane Doe's past relationships with different men that occurred years ago, two of which were in a different state, none of which involved a paternity establishment action, and none of which included a finding that Miss Jane Doe actually faked being pregnant. That's right. There was no finding in the court system that she faked it. There's just hard evidence backed by experts that say, oh yeah, she faked not only that, but cancer. That's what the evidence says, as agreed upon by the expert that was hired to look at that evidence. As far as whether or not this case involves the men in the past, you would argue, well, it's the pattern of similarities that would make it all, sort of related. To help illustrate the absurdity of Mr. Echard's position, consider if the situation was reversed. So he says to help illustrate the absurdity. That's, I believe, the legal way of sharing what he's about to share, which is insane, because not everybody with the right acumen might read this and understand that this is a complete hypothetical. In his papers, Mr. Echard claims Miss Jane Doe could never have been pregnant because Mr. Echard says he never had penetrative intimacy with her. Thus, the question of whether intimacy occurred, P and the V, may be an important disputed fact. It may also not be an important fact, given that Mr. Eckert has admitted engaging in sufficient acts that, by his own admission, a pregnancy was possible. Again, Clayton would tell you that was when he was being gaslighted to believe, well, maybe there were fluids down there or whatever. Maybe I sneezed and it came out and I was bending over to tie my shoes and no. So, yeah, he was gaslighted. Now, assume Miss Jane Doe disclosed she was planning to call 3 new last-minute trial witnesses. So this is a hypothetical, as far as I know. I don't believe she's planning to call these last-minute trial witnesses. But this hypothetical is damning. Now, assume Miss Jane Doe disclosed she was planning to call 3 last-minute trial witnesses, women who each claim to have been AR'd in the past by Mr. Eckert. If allowed, this evidence would, of course, tend to prove Mr. Eckert lied about not having intercourse with Miss Jane Doe, and that she has a pattern, or in that he has a pattern of R-ing women and lying about it. This would tend to support finding the same thing happened here. But this type of propensity evidence is never admissible to prove guilt. So, do you see what just happened right there? They didn't accuse him of this so much as they said, what if? They plant that idea and put that in writing that's now going to live there when his name is searched. It's just wild stuff. But this type of propensity evidence is never admissible to prove guilt. That is exactly what occurred in the recent matter cited in Miss Jane Doe's motion involving movie producer Harvey Weinstein. He was charged with the R word to 3 women, but the trial court also allowed prosecutors to introduce testimony from 3 other women who testified that he also had done that to them. Not surprising, given the voluminous evidence, Mr. Weinstein was convicted, but his conviction was overturned by the highest court in New York solely because the trial judge's error in allowing propensity testimony of the 3 other non-charged victims. The difference here, guys, and again, I'm not a lawyer here, but as a non-lawyer, I'm looking at this going, the difference here is the evidence in Clayton's case is to show a pattern that existed specifically with how things were fabricated, the fraud that occurred, the sort of control aspect of it all. That is important to lead up to the lack of credibility with regards to this who he said, she said piece of, this court case here that involves no evidence she was ever pregnant in the first place outside of, simple HCG tests. So he cites all of this here. Again, this has already been laughed at by many legal scholars. Understandably, Mr. Eckert notes that although Rule 404B does not allow evidence of past wrongdoing to be used to prove current misconduct, such evidence can be offered for other reasons, such as to show motive, opportunity, intent, preparation, plan. The problem, as explained further below, is Mr. Eckert is not seeking to use testimony from Miss Jane Doe's past relationships for any permissible reason, and B, it is clear this other evidence does not actually establish any sort of motive, opportunity, plan, a conclusion which is somewhat hampered by the fact that Mr. Eckert has failed to comply with his obligations under Rule 49 to disclose a fair summary of the substance of each witness's testimony. Well, I would disagree. I think interviewing these past men does show motive. She wants to control men to have a relationship, is the opinion of, I believe, Clayton's side here, right? I mean, that's obvious that they're saying, well, she has a propensity to do this type of thing, and here are the other examples of her doing this. So she wants to make it sound simple, like, well, maybe I was pregnant, maybe I wasn't. And Clayton's going, no. This man was trapped into this con, and we know that because this is the same con done once, twice, thrice times before, is what they're arguing. For the reasons, the court must grant Miss Jane Doe motion in limine, and exclude any propensity evidence from Greg Gillespie, Michael Maricini, and or victim 0. I believe that to be Matt. So they really don't want Greg Gillespie or Michael Maricini to talk. Now, as we showed earlier, they threatened Michael Maricini to say if he shows up, and isn't properly, subpoenaed, that they're going to have him arrested. This being Jane Doe, the same woman who wanted or was texting Michael Maricini telling him how much she loved him after having her initial sort of blow up with him. It's bizarre stuff, folks. So it's bizarre stuff. Discussion. Respondent has failed to timely disclose information required by the rule. Mr. Eckert has failed to disclose the substance of anticipated testimony. The first issue raised in Miss Jane Doe's motion in limine is that Mr. Eckert failed to comply with Rule 49. Amongst other things, he failed to disclose a fair summary of the substance of the expected testimony of Messrs. Gillespie, Maricini, and Redacted. As noted in Miss Jane Doe's motion in page 3, lines 4 to 6, the entire disclosure as to Mr. Victim Zero's comprised a single sentence stating, this witness is expected to testify about his prior interactions with petitioner, including his personal knowledge about her alleged fabricated pregnancy back in 2014. This, I'm assuming, is the one before Mike Maricini. So we've got Matt, Mike, Greg, Clayton, all with extremely similar claims. None of them led to a baby being born. In his response, Mr. Eckert refutes this claim with another single sentence claiming all of this information was timely provided to Jane as early as the second supplemental disclosure statement provided March 29th. Just one problem. The disclosure statement referenced by Mr. Eckert confirms proper disclosure did not occur. As it relates to Redacted, the entire substance of Mr. Eckert's disclosure from his second supplemental disclosure statement is shown below, which confirms exactly what was alleged in Miss Jane Doe's motion. No meaningful disclosure of the substance of Mr. Redacted's testimony has been provided. This witness is expected to testify about his prior interaction with petitioner. So I guess they want more information as to the meaning of why he's testifying, and Woodnick's side is saying, well, he's testifying because he's got his own story about a fabricated pregnancy. That's what he's testifying about. And he doesn't want to be there. I'm surprised Victim Zero is actually a witness. I didn't think he wanted anything to do with this. They sent a cease and desist to Megan Fox, which, again, I don't blame him. I don't blame him for not wanting to be here. But it appears as though he's stepping up and wanting to do the right thing. As it relates to Victim 1, Michael Maricini, the entire substance of disclosed testimony is shown below. The witness is expected to testify about his prior interactions with petitioner, her alleged 2 pregnancies during their relationship, and the subsequent litigation. What is particularly inappropriate about these bare bones in the extreme disclosures is that they conflict with the facts as Miss Jane Doe understands them. So the lawyer, her own lawyer, tiptoeing around this. It conflicts with the facts as Miss Jane Doe understands them, because God knows he probably doesn't have the opinion where he believes her, making disclosure by Mr. Eckert all the more important. Specifically, the disclosure related to Mr. Redacted indicates he will testify about a fabricated pregnancy in the resulting litigation. But according to Miss Jane Doe, there was no litigation of any kind between her and Mr. Redacted, nor did she ever fake being pregnant with him. Again, I'm assuming this Redacted is Matt. I'm assuming because we're not redacting Mike here. We know she faked a pregnancy with Mike. I mean, I can show you that evidence right here, right? These are text messages sent to Mike as verified by a computer forensic expert. It's my turn. Just talk to the doctor, blah, blah, blah. Oh, excuse me. This was faking having ovary cancer. Is that what it's called? Where she sends this and she says, I'm going in, and then it's like, well, how do we know she's saying she's going to have the ovary removed? Well, then she shares this, what is fraudulent medical information, saying yesterday you received ovary removal surgery of your right ovary, as well as a surgical abortion. So there she is. That's it. Now this has all been verified by a forensic computer expert. We'll have to see if she's able to find a forensic expert willing to say a different story about these files. Very hard to say this is fabricated when it's a text message sent with a mother effing selfie. Very hard to say that's fabricated right there. Now, what is she doing there? I don't know. She's probably getting a basic checkup. For what do I know? But I don't know how the drugs hit you when you guys go to the doctor, but that looks like somebody who's feeling good on the nitrous oxide. All right. Okay, let's continue. Thus, Miss Jane Doe simply has no idea what to expect, if anything, from Mr. Victim Zero testimony. Prior litigation? What litigation? Where? When? This is precisely the sort of trial by ambush the disclosure rules were created to prevent. Trial by ambush is a tactic no longer countenanced in Arizona courts. Similarly, the only litigation that occurred between Miss Jane Doe and Mr. Maricini had nothing whatsoever to do with a prior pregnancy. Rather, in January 2018, Miss Jane Doe requested and later received a DVRO from the San Fran County Superior Court during their nearly 2-year relationship, including an allegation by Miss Jane Doe that he slapped me and strangled during intimacy on multiple occasions. But she did say that was consensual, that, okay, this is where it gets muddy, right? Because it's like, who even cares? Like, there's no credibility left to her story. She said she was smothered into unconsciousness. These specific statements were set forth in a detailed declaration filed by Jane Doe in the California court, a copy of which is attached hereto as Exhibit A. No part of that case had anything to do with Miss Jane Doe being pregnant or allegedly faking being pregnant. While that might not be part of the court case, those allegations have been proven here. See, in previous documents, she said, I 100% never lied about having whatever, ovarian cancer. And then we say, all right, bet, right? And then we take a look at it. We raise the $3,000 and we get a forensic person to completely disagree with her, right? And say that these text messages came from her accounts and they are living on Mike Maricini's computer. She said these things. Now, if she wants to claim that someone hacked her computer 9 years ago, whatever, that's a different argument she could make. It wouldn't really help her. But, to think that doesn't matter because that wasn't in the court system is a different story. What probably happened was Mike Maricini just tried to move on with his life, not realizing there would be other people in the future and this and that. He probably had no idea that this was some sort of pattern. Because there was never any pregnancy-related litigation between Jane and Mike Maricini or Jane and Mr. Victim Zero, this makes Mr. Eckert's complete and total failure to offer any disclosure regarding the substance of their testimony all the more inexcusable. That point standing alone warrants complete exclusion of their testimony on non-disclosure grounds. As to Mike Maricini, Mr. Eckert has also failed to disclose valid contact information for the witness and or has provided erroneous information about the intent of the witness to testify. In his response brief, Mr. Eckert correctly notes Rule 49 requires both sides to disclose, among other things, name, addresses, and telephone numbers of all expected trial witnesses, along with a statement fairly describing the substance of their expected testimony. As explained above, Mr. Eckert has not complied with that requirement as to Messrs. Gillespie, Maricini, and Victim Zero because he has not provided any explanation, fair or otherwise, describing the substance of their expected testimony. But separate and apart from that problem, Mr. Eckert also failed to comply with Rule 49 as to Mr. Maricini because he has failed to provide valid contact information for the witness, including his current address. The purpose of requiring that information, and by the way, could you imagine why Mike Maricini would not want to give Jane Doe's attorney his address? Are you kidding me right now? The purpose of requiring that information is self-explanatory. By the way, Jane Doe's attorney has emailed back and forth with Mike Maricini. I'm sure they have a sufficient way to get each other's information. Rule 49 requires a disclosure of witness contact information to permit an ongoing party to contact the witness, interview him or her, and to serve the witness with legal process such as a deposition, subpoena, if the witness refuses to communicate voluntarily. Here, shortly after receiving Mr. Eckert's disclosure identifying Messrs. Gillespie, Maricini, and Victim Zero as expected trial witnesses, undersigned counsel attempted to contact each witness to determine what relevant information, if any, each had. The only contact information provided for Mr. Victim Zero was an attorney in San Francisco named Redacted. To date, undersigned counsel has been unable to reach Redacted despite calling her several times and has received no response from her. As for Mr. Maricini, the only contact information provided was that of an attorney in California named Randy Sue Pollock. Ms. Pollock was counsel of record for Mr. Maricini during part of the litigation. Undersigned counsel contacted Ms. Pollock to ask about Mr. Maricini's expected trial testimony. In response, Ms. Pollock indicated Mr. Maricini was not going to testify at trial, and she refused to make him available for either an informal interview or deposition. And then I guess that's some information right there. Such gamesmanship by Mr. Eckert has no place in this proceeding. Oh, how rich. His conduct in refusing to disclose the substance of expected testimony from Messrs. Gillespie, Maricini, and Victim Zero, and refuses to provide accurate contact information from Mr. Maricini where subpoenas could be served leads to only one result. They are not permitted to testify at trial due to Mr. Eckert's violation of the disclosure rules. She really doesn't want them talking. None of these arguments are about whether or not, this is just like, we cannot allow these guys to talk. So then they cite case laws. The object of discovery is to assist the search for truth by providing the parties with all the evidence possible so that the crucial facts may be presented at trial and a just decision made. Mr. Eckert has not complied with the rules. He has thumbed his nose at them and at Jane Doe's right to a fair proceeding. Oh, Jane Doe wants a fair proceeding. She's had home field advantage for her whole life. Talk about fair. She was born on third base and thought she hit a triple, right? Privilege. Unbelievable. If Mr. Eckert truly believed his witnesses had relevant information to share, he was required to disclose that information in a timely manner and thereby provide Jane Doe with a fair opportunity to interview and or depose each witness in order to learn what they have to say. Rather than complying with his disclosure duties, Mr. Eckert appears to have actively and intentionally thwarted Miss Jane Doe's rights under the rules. The result is that each witness must be precluded from testifying at trial. And again, they're not going to have much time to testify, but if they each go under oath and say, Your Honor, she faked a pregnancy, she was never pregnant, we never this, we never that. You have Greg Gillespie saying we only hooked up once or twice, and I didn't use protection and all that. There is no dispute evidence of other acts is not admissible to show the same act probably occurred here. Thus, there is no dispute it would be improper to permit three of Jane Doe's ex-boyfriends to testify. She did the same thing to me in the past, therefore she likely did the same thing to Mr. Eckert. That point of law is so clear. Mr. Eckert makes no attempt to challenge it. Instead, Mr. Eckert argues the disputed testimony is admissible under the exception, evidence R 404B2, because it is offered solely to show things such as motive, opportunity, intent, preparation. Again, motive being, a payback. The motive is paying them back for leaving me, for not wanting to be with me. The motive is trying to keep a relationship going, date with intention, sign this contract, and I won't have the baby. Same thing. I mean, that's the motive. So when people look at it, they're looking for a motive of money. It's like, she doesn't need money. She's got Papa Doe over there, letting her live out in the casita. I'm sure she's not paying utility bills, right? She's got nice horses she can jump around with. She doesn't need motive. She needs a boyfriend. And the motive is to keep the boyfriend. Excuse me, I said she didn't need motive. She doesn't need money. She needs, okay, you get it. Although Rule 404B2 certainly does allow evidence that fits into those categories, Mr. Eckert completely fails to show that challenged evidence actually fits into any of those categories. The fact Ms. Owens had a conflict with a past boyfriend shows she's had a motive of some kind in this case. A motive to what? To be unhappy again? No, the motive is the motive they're alleging is to try to trap men into relationships. Mr. Eckert makes no effort, or to just, make them pay for breaking up with her. Mr. Eckert makes no effort to answer that question. I just answered it right away. It's pretty easy. It's easy what the motive is. Perhaps because he knows the evidence of Ms. Owens' past relationships does not remotely fit into any of the categories of Rule 404B2. This is particularly true given there are few, if any, similarities between the facts of this case and the facts of the three prior cases Mr. Eckert wants to introduce. Oh, I completely disagree. There are so many similarities. Indeed, as it relates to redacted, identified as MM in Mr. Eckert's brief, there is literally no explanation of any kind regarding what, if anything, Mr. Redacted plans to say. Mr. Eckert makes no attempt at all to explain how Mr. Redacted testimony, whatever it may be, could somehow establish a motive or plan on the part of Miss Jane Doe in her one-night relationship with Mr. Eckert. There is literally no explanation of that issue at all. Similarly, to the extent Mr. Eckert discusses the expected trial testimony of Mr. Maricini in a bit more detail, he completely overlooks these key points. The facts and circumstances of the relationship between Jane Doe and Maricini were completely different from the one-night relationship. Well, okay, completely different in that they lasted longer. Jane Doe dated Maricini for nearly 2 years, whereas she never dated Eckert at all. Yeah, but did Mike Maricini, they were never official, right? He didn't even want to post her on his social media. In my opinion, from what I've gleaned here, they were just F-buddies, right? Miss Jane Doe and Mike Maricini traveled around the world together, paid for primarily by Jane Doe, something that did not happen with Mr. Eckert. Oh my gosh. The fact that there are so many similarities between Greg, Mike, Matt, and Clayton. The fact that he's arguing, come on, I know her attorney's smarter than this. The fact that he's arguing, they're different because she took this guy on vacation. She would have taken Clayton on vacation too. He never let it get that far. Greg Gillespie never let it get that far. Although they did some vacations too, right? Greg Gillespie, weren't they going to go to Sonoma or something like that? Oh my gosh, how rubbish is this? This is literal garbage.
That's rubbish, Dave.
And I love that he's going to get triggered that some YouTuber like me says that it's garbage. I'm just looking for my button.
Garbage.
Jane Doe claims she was pregnant with Mike Maricini, and then she terminated the pregnancy via a voluntary medical abortion. Facts not present in this case. Jane Doe claimed Mike Maricini physically, did that to her later in the relationship. A fact not present in this case. The only litigation between Jane Doe and Mike Maricini involved matters of DV. There was no paternity establishment litigation because Jane Doe never claimed to have maintained the pregnancy and never sought to have Mike declared the father. The question is, how, in this text or this set of text, she talks about getting a surgical abortion, right? We know this is fake. We know this document's fake. So how are we to believe she was ever pregnant if in a fake document that says she also had ovary removed, that she also got, you know what I mean? How are we supposed to believe the truth that were said surrounding the lies? How is the onus on Clayton's side to decide as he sifts through the rubble what was fact and what was fiction? Falsus in uno, falseness in omnibus. If you're lying in one thing, aren't you lying in all these other? And if you're not, it's boy who cried wolf. How are you supposed to, In short, far from showing a pattern of highly similar conduct, the facts and circumstances of the relationship between Mike and Jane show exactly the opposite. The details from the past bear little, if any, resemblance to the facts of the case. Other than the fact both matters involve Jane Doe and both involve short-lived pregnancies, which ended for entirely different reasons. Yeah, they ended because there was a contract. If you date me, I'll get rid of the baby. This is why Mike's testimony is so, with Greg Gillespie at least, this is why Mike Maricini's testimony is so clearly improper, because it is not being offered for any admissible purpose. It is being offered solely for the purpose provided. Okay, so it goes on and on. Maricopa County Superior Court, case number March 1st, 2023, rejecting arguments, defendant's fraudulent intent. I'm going through it. This is case study. We got to go through it. Mr. Eckert's goal here could not be any clearer. He is trying to use evidence of what he claims happened in Jane Doe's past relationships for one reason, to help convince this court the same thing happened here, to allow such inflammatory and irrelevant evidence in a case like would constitute, it's not, okay, irrelevant evidence would be if she lied on her taxes, right? Irrelevant evidence would be if her case where she got in an accident and sued Uber. That's irrelevant. What's relevant is what Clayton's trying to prove, which is a coordinated effort to trap men with fake pregnancies. That's what he's trying to prove. Here, as the proponent of the disputed evidence, Mr. Eckert bears the burden of showing the evidence is admissible. He has failed to meet that burden because the only purpose of the evidence is to show Jane Doe has engaged in other acts in the past, and therefore she likely did the same thing here. This evidence is per se inadmissible under Rule 404B, and it must be excluded. It's inadmissible unless you show motive. All right, here's where it gets interesting. On page 7 of his brief, Mr. Eckert briefly mentions a report from an expert named John Berryhill. Thanks to the audience for raising that money to get that report, which purportedly involved thousands of pages of text messages. I don't know if it was thousands of pages of text messages. I think it was thousands of pages of code. Okay, I could be wrong. I haven't read it, but I'm sure there are hundreds of pages of text messages between Miss Jane Doe and Mike Maricini during the time they dated in San Francisco between 2016 and 2017. Now, I want to briefly go back for a second. So in this document, which we showed I'm not going to flip back, but as we just showed, Jane Doe admits that she was pregnant 2 times before, that being with Matt and that being with Mike. She claims she was pregnant those times. What's interesting with that is that we have text messages from Jane Doe to Greg Gillespie. Here's page 14 of a 77-page police report. She's talking about how she took the pills for the Plan B. And she says right here, I think it's very clear, I've never been pregnant before. That's what she says. I've never been pregnant before. Now, it's cut off, but we all know exactly what that says. So she claims, and maybe there's a clearer version of this, she claims she's never been pregnant before. So when you look at this evidence, they want you to say, oh, none of this, it's inadmissible because none of it makes sense. It's not related. You go, well, was she pregnant before or was she not? Did she have ovary cancer or did she not? Did she get an abortion or did she not? Did she get knocked up by Clayton or did she not? They're saying, Clayton, you need to prove she was never pregnant. Clayton's saying, we can't prove she was never pregnant because you can't prove a negative. We can prove motive to continue to do this. These alleged text messages were disclosed by Mr. Eckert just 3 days before the close of discovery, and none of the underlying data supporting Mr. Berryhill's analysis has been disclosed. Mr. Eckert offers no evidence or explanation in regards why this voluminous information was not disclosed in a timely manner as required by Rule 49B. Similarly, Mr. Eckert offers nothing to authenticate any of these messages as required by Arizona. For these reasons, and based on yet another instance of improper sandbagging by Mr. Eckert, Jane Doe intends to separately seek exclusion of Mr. Berryhill's report and the messages appended thereto. Since this evidence was not timely disclosed and still has not been fully disclosed, Jane Doe will offer no response other than to say the allegations about what Mr. Berryhill's report says are disputed and have not been independently investigated or verified. So she's saying this is disputed. I'm disputing these messages which were sent and still in Mike Maricini's iMessages. I'm guessing they're going to have a hard time finding a forensic expert who's going to be on their side. This is a smoking gun. So they're disputing that. Conclusion, for all the reasons stated above, the court should issue an order precluding Mr. Eckert from calling Greg, Mike, and or redacted as trial witnesses. There it is. There's their motion. Let's see what else we have here. Jane Doe declares her history of relationships. Mike and I were romantically involved. I met Mike in March through the league. We've already seen all this. He was very charming. She gives us all, all this information here. I can't say for sure, but I believe he may have been asleep and involuntary hit me somehow. I have a black eye for a day or two after this. So he turns over in his sleep, and now she's claiming DV. So she continues her declaration. Look, we've already shown all of this. She claims she got an abortion. Let's see here. In the days following my abortion, she says in July 2016 she terminated her pregnancy. He pressured her to make an appointment at Planned Parenthood. When I didn't do it fast enough, he scheduled it for me because I wanted to be with him and thought we could have a future together. And since I didn't want to bring a child into the world without a father, I decided to go through with the abortion. In July 2016, I terminated my pregnancy. So couldn't they subpoena Planned Parenthood for these records? In the days following my abortion, I felt sad and started to feel immense guilt. I felt selfish for choosing my relationship with Mike over the baby. Have we seen these documents of her getting an abortion? Have we seen that? It wasn't anonymous. We know that. She says after she got the abortion, he got mad, and it goes on and on. They were rocky. It's just, nothing more we need to see here. If anyone sees anything in these documents that's worth me sharing, please let me know. But again, it's just this whole idea that she flew him to Iceland. That's where she got the TEDx talk from. He claims that after all of this nonsense went down, she was still claiming she loved him and all of this. This was the basis for her TEDx talk. She talks about the physical aspect of what went down, and he used his hands to shove her into the headboard. All like just rough stuff. Of course, let's just keep on going here. Is this all of? I don't want to share this because it's stuff we've already read before. I think this gets us to the end here. Let's just see if there's anything else here. So this was her declaration to renew the RO. She wants to renew, all of the information because she thinks he's still a threat to her, even though she wants to call him on the phone and talk to him. Incidents since the restraining order. It just goes on and on and on. So this, I guess, is supposed to be evidence as to why she doesn't want them to be, witnesses. She talks about sleeping on the couch because the bed is where she was hurt. She stopped going to her favorite restaurants. She has flashbacks. All these things, and yet she's willing to get on the phone with him. Very odd. Without the RO, I would never feel safe again. I live with fear of Mike Maricini every day of my life. He may not look like the kind of person who would do dangerous, lethal things, but he repeatedly did these things to her, she says. And that's what she signed, and that's the end of that. Now, there's other documents here, not worth much of our time. She received a certificate of co-parenting, a divorce class, 4 hours long. She paid for the cheaper version of the co-parenting divorce class. That must have been fun. Assuming this document is legit. I have no idea if that is. I have no idea if the document's legit. I have no idea if the dates are legit. Although I do have to say, it looks as though this text is darker than the text on the left. Again, Boy Who Cried Wolf. I have no idea if this is real or not, but we do know she loves Adobe Acrobat. And then this is just a notice of non-availability, which just shows the dates that her attorney won't be around. There it is, folks. We'll be live on Patreon to continue to discuss this. We have some more. I'm going to talk a little bit in more depth today on Patreon regarding why I believe part of the strategy by Jane Doe's camp is to hurt these men. Not hurt them physically, but hurt them emotionally by sharing their depositions and by sharing all this information and all of the past wounds, reopening them. I'm going to get into more of that on the Patreon and some of the pretty interesting accusations that are out there. All right, we'll have that content coming to you right after this, patreon.com/Dave Neal. Let me know what you guys think. Leave a comment.